This still as well. There we go. Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Alexis Truitt, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Alliance for Theater and Education. And I am so excited that you all are here joining us tonight for our very first Theater in Our Schools workshop. So Theater in Our Schools is a celebration that is occurring in these last couple of days of March. It's been happening all month, and we've done various things. We started doing this workshop series last year, where we presented a workshop once a month in celebration of Theater in Our Schools month. And so I'm so excited that Joel Jason Rodriguez will be taking us through this one, as well as two that will be following in April and May. So Joel Jason, it is yours.
Hi. Well, first, let me introduce myself. I am Joel Jason Rodriguez. I'm the AATE Vice Chair and Co-Director of the Anti-Racism, Anti-Oppression, Justice and Equity Committee. I use he, series pronouns, and I am a 50-year-old queer Latinx cisgender man with shoulder-length, salt and pepper curly hair, with biscuit toned skin and brown eyes, and I'm wearing my favorite gray shirt. And I'm sitting in my living room, which is blurred out behind me. Since our activities or this session is shared digitally to the internet, I wanted to take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within technologies, structure, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous peoples worldwide. In a moment, I'm going to invite you to join me in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of our time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. If you want to read more about the importance of land acknowledgement, you can check this website, or to see the native lands that you may be on, please visit this website as well that I posted. And if you know the lands you are on, please share in the chat. I am on the ancestral lands of the Lipan Apache, the Coatican, and the Estukna peoples, which is now known by its colonized name, McAllen, Texas. And as we continue on, one of the reasons you can actually use the two links, and you can type in your location, and it's like these are incredible links that you can look on. They're great resources. But one of the reasons why we came, thank you, Heather, the Shawnee, Osage, and Cherokee, known as Louisville, Kentucky. This conversation, or this moment, this idea for the TIOS happened mainly because that we have a lot of like educators in our organization, but then also what's been happening here in Texas, and then what's been happening in Florida, as well as in Virginia and Indiana, Utah. We're seeing a trend where legislation's either being proposed or is actually being passed, like as in Florida, with it's been known now as the Don't Say Gay bill, of putting a more restriction onto our public schools and to our educators that are out there in the schools as to like what they can teach and how they teach, to the point that there is oversight even given to the parents, to oversight given or power given to the parents to really go through the curriculum in such a way to demand and request alternative assignments. But in terms of like how it's being approached, this is where it's becoming concerning, in terms of like examples being proposed that curriculum be done a year in advance so that parents can then look through it for parental approval, flag what is concerning, and then that instructor would either need to change the lesson or to go in and give an alternative lesson for that particular assignment for this person if they were in their class. We've already seen, like, in what's happening in Texas, for example, in one school district, I believe it's in Kylene, have already been like 33 books thus far being proposed to be banned. And again, a lot of this is going back to the focal point of being critical race theory, as well as dealing with anything that is dealing with like LGBTQIA subject matter or themes. And so in anything that is dealing with, in terms of basically with dealing with race and justice. And so knowing where the momentum is starting to happen with this, we thought for us that in terms of when we start looking at like what does it mean to be in these schools, and knowing already that the conversation that we're here carrying across the US is that it is becoming difficult to find teachers to come into the schools or to stay in the schools. And so really beginning to make that decision of leaving the profession because of what's occurring right now, or what they already see happening, what they already foresee to happen when they come back for the next academic year. Already in our state of Texas, there's already been a governor's task force then set up to like begin to have those conversations about teacher retention and recruitment. Although there's only two educators there on the panel or in this task force, and the rest are split between administrators and principals, most of them retired. So again, it's very interesting to see how this plays out. But we wanted to have a moment to have this conversation, to figure out, like, to hear your stories, to see what is happening in your communities regarding this situation, because I know that it's happening in other states. And then to go from there, because we want to be able to have this as a series, so that our next step would be talking about in the next session about advocacy, and how is it that we can be advocates for our colleagues, for ourselves, for our communities when it comes to these issues that are starting to arise in our communities and in the states. And then the next step being about action plan, and like what are our action steps for ourselves, and then what we can do even as an advocates for our organization. So this is where we're at. And so that was where our conversation came from, and where this whole idea for this TIOS was meant to be. Felicia, hello, how are you?
Hi, you guys. I just was putting that in the chat, but so yeah, I might not put the camera on, but I'm definitely here and present and will be a part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. But I just wanted to be able to spend this hour with us, or 45 minutes or so, to like have that conversation with y'all, to get a sense of perspective of like what you've heard or what you've been experiencing. And the other concern too is that this is really focused, like right now it's focusing on public schools. In some states like ours, there's already conversations of like what to expect for higher ed. So those conversations are starting to be amped up. And granted, also we're in an election year over here, so some of this is like, you know, again, being fuel for more of a platform to like get them reelected. But we also know that those are things that are happening in here. So it's usually we see what's happening in the schools and we know what to anticipate for higher ed, but we wanted to have this opportunity to have this conversation. I'm gonna pull up something just in case I want to write some notes. But what experiences have y'all had thus far, in like in your states, or in terms of like any of your colleagues, regarding some of these things that have been occurring that I just mentioned, you know, in terms of focusing on critical race theory, or, you know, have there been situations, or is there possible legislation occurring in your area that's going to like really focus on that type of like oversight, or as it's being termed at times, a parent's bill of rights when it comes to education.
I'll say this. Thankfully, I'm in a district where it's not hitting us yet. I work in the Trenton Public School District, which is predominantly Black and Brown people. And so at this point, there hasn't been any kind of statements coming out that our district has stood by regarding any of these hot topics that are going on right now. Mainly because I guess the major thing for us is just still kind of keeping our COVID numbers down. I know throughout the state of New Jersey that, you know, the talk about critical race theory has definitely been something that has popped up. And the rights of the parents have been things that have been mentioned. Outside of our district, I know there are other districts that are probably going to start dealing with that in New Jersey. Because our parents really aren't highly active in our students' education, it's, like I said, in our district, it's not something that we're sitting there going, oh yeah, we need to be concerned that all of a sudden they're going to want to see all this information in advance. And we're lucky if out of the over 2,000 plus kids in the high school, if we can get maybe like 50 of their parents to come out for a parent teacher conference, we're like, wow. So it hasn't hit us, but I know it's hitting other areas, and I want to be more aware of what's happening outside of our bubble.
That's awesome. Thank you, Felicia. So those conversations are occurring, and you like in those other areas.
Yes, I know that our teachers union has started like having these conversations. It hasn't been a huge push yet. Right now, the big push, of course, across the state has just been, you know, mask mandates and stuff like that. But I know it's one of those things that like you see on the horizon that it's coming up, and like, you know, it's that this conversation within the next year or so is going to be the next big hot topic for us in the state of New Jersey.
I just during this past month, some fellow arts educators in organizations in Louisville shared an email that some drafts of bills were circulating among the Kentucky legislature that are along the same lines of what you're talking about. The requirements of submitting lesson plans a year in advance, and restrictions, requests for alternate lesson plans, that's beginning to circulate. And I haven't read them yet, just to be transparent, but I know the arts educators are beginning to circulate that these things are being discussed in the Kentucky Congress and Senate, and to keep and to start speaking to our representatives. And I have a friend who is a public school teacher in Indiana, and I have noticed that she and her fellow school teachers have been making a lot of noise right now on Facebook about bills that are already in front of their state house. So I know that it's been on the forefront of a lot of teachers' minds in Indiana.
And I think even the Indiana one, the concern that even goes to be like what is frightening about the Indiana example, what you mentioned, is that I think it goes so far as that the parents can have the right to sue the teacher. Is that correct?
I think you're right. I don't quote me on that, but
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it puts the teacher at risk, as well as holds them up to, you know, standards that are, I mean, in my own opinion, are silly. I feel like if you're a responsible educator, you continue to respond to the kids that are in front of you. You could plan a year in advance, but things are going to come up that you're, you know, not aware of. You have to keep responding to the needs of the young people in front of you. As well as I have for a while in Kentucky, I've had frustrations about politicians who don't have a background, and on the federal level, politicians who do not have a background in education or experience or a degree in education, trying to create laws and rules about it. I feel like people who study childhood development and have the education degrees should be the ones setting the tone for what happens in schools, as well as, you know, the customers of the public school system are full society, not individual parents, but are in every, you know, every tax person and every person who lives and breathes in our community. So yeah, I feel like, anyway, I'm rambling a little bit now, so I'll give it back to you.
No, for sure. Thank you, Heather. And those are the things that we're seeing. Like, I think it's very like it's when we look at what's happening in Florida and then what's being proposed here in Texas, all of them have a very similar vibe and is very cookie cutter in a lot of ways in terms of like how they're approaching this. And so I'm curious, like we know that when they are really looking at these things, they're looking at core subjects, but then we know how that trickles down into our areas in the electives. So I was curious if any of y'all had any have heard anything from, like, say, art teachers, theater educators, from music, choir, dance, or any of those that have heard that, you know, how this could impact them in what ways.
So I'm in higher education and northern Louisiana, so a rural area, very conservative state. I have not heard yet as far as in real time. Now, I do listen to a radio station, and it's a Christian radio station. So they are broadcasting, I believe, out of probably Florida or, you know, Mississippi, Texas, one of those. And ours, this is not my home state, so I must say that. I guess I should have said that first. I'm a transplant here because of work. And I have found this state to not be not on the progressive end at all. So Texas is we're probably 30, 40 years behind whatever Texas is thinking of or doing now. Texas is a goal for this state. So just to show you, we're not even close to having these types of conversations, not even at least in higher education that I'm aware of. So yes.
If Louisiana is thinking like Texas is a goal, like, oh no, go the opposite direction. Like, they want to be like Texas. Oh, not right now.
Well, most of our graduates and even they're from here or not, Texas is a place they want to move, you know, career-wise. When they get the degree, they head straight to Texas. So it's a goal, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a goal for the state.
I will say it's interesting, as you mentioned, Joel, Jason, sort of being from the safe state, as it were, with Massachusetts. I am very fortunate in that I work in a district that does have sort of a strong social justice core to it, or, you know, advances those beliefs, but there definitely are still sort of the detracting voices or the dissenting voices. And I watched not too long ago, my partner teaches in another district, and watching her school committee go through a public speak session on banning LGBTQ plus books was fascinating, I guess, a little disheartening. I mean, there was actually a lot of strong support for keeping those books and not having the censorship. But there was definitely people in the community that had come out to speak. And the thing that was most concerning was many of them weren't people who had students in the school system. And so I'm very wary of, okay, who are the actual people involved in the decision making, in the process, the people who are in the system versus those who are outside, who are trying to sort of push whatever agenda they have. And that's really difficult in the public education space, as so, you know, someone mentioned, it's for everyone. And
Yeah.
so, and because it's supported by everyone's tax dollars, everyone has that voice. And I'll be very interested to see, you know, in the next year or so, which voices are amplified, which ones are you know, listened to. I think that's going to be, you know, even in a place that's very, like you said, it's very safe, and it is, and we're very fortunate here in Massachusetts, a lot of progressive policies, but we also do have, right, currently we have a Republican governor. We probably will have another one, or we could. It'll be interesting to see how the landscape sort of shifts as local things become more national.
Yeah. And it like, as you mentioned, Casey, one of the things that's interesting is that there have been, you know, again, like as you're mentioning, that there have been, I guess you can say, actors going in and bringing these concerns and these issues up at, you know, at the school board or whatever, with legislators or whatever, and doing so not actually having a stake in that school, aside from, you know, again, being paying tax dollars, you know. But again, like in terms of like, my child goes to the school, this is my concern, that's not even a part of the conversation. And where that was actually what was coming up in, you know, what I mentioned again about what was happening here with one of the school districts, and in terms of the books, that some of the people that were making these concerns were not even, you know, they didn't even have a connection to the district in terms of that, in terms of like children there. And so, yeah, and it in a way, it becomes a bit concerning, especially as like we will see like how, like, we're probably a year away for any of this to pass. You know, Florida's already in a mix of it, so we'll get a sense of like how this starts to play out. But you know, when you think about like what this means for a theater teacher going in and wanting to produce a play, and then that play becomes questioned, if it was, say, Zoot Suit or Raisin in the Sun, or you wanted to do an adaptation of Shakespeare and decolonize it, you know, and decolonize it to the point of like, you're really bringing these questions of, you know, race and gender and, you know, colonization or what have you out. What does that mean, you know, if these things are in place? And how is it that then you're able to like be able to have those like critical conversations with your students about, you know, again, to be a citizen in this world, and to be able to have, you know, to come from a standpoint of being able to decipher their experiences and to understand perspectives and nuances and to be empathetic and all those things that make us who we are, to how we connect with people. But then, you know, again, we're being like, the reins are being pulled back from us. And it's been an interesting conversation even within our schools, because I know on our end, one of the things that, you know, again, it goes back to academic freedom. Well, academic freedom is like, you know, we have that here. And so when it comes to our dual credits instructors, you know, it's because we have a very, very, very robust dual credit program at our college. And so we have adjuncts or faculty that go into the schools and teach, but then we also have a large proportion of dual credit, like actual high school instructors that do have the credentials that are dual credit instructors for these courses, and teach these courses for the school, for their schools and for their school district. And so then what does that mean for them now? You know, where does that protection lie for them in the school district if this were passed? Do they still have that protection, you know, being a college course, you know, and being able to have these conversations in US history or in government or in English? And then, you know, again, knowing that when that class is over, you can't have those conversations or you can't teach this course, you know? And so there's a lot of things that start to like unravel, I guess, in your head if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, and really think about like how this can then play out and where it ends up being a gotcha situation for an educator.
At the university level, do you find yourself ever in conflict between what's discussed in the theater department or what's the sort of general conversation within the program is versus what happens outside of, you know, where students start taking courses in other subject areas or other disciplines, or I don't know how the structure is set up, but you know, as an undergrad, there was sort of a core number of classes you had to take throughout the university, and then you had your major. Just curious, do you find that being a conflict at all, or?
Meaning that we find ourselves in that type of situation?
Yeah, where you might be, you know, teaching something that's not being taught or not being supported in another area.
At the college level, no. But at the same time, you know, we get in situations where some productions are questioned, you know, like one time we did The Indian Wants the Bronx. And, you know, afterwards we did a talk back. And that production caused for some people, it was tenuous. It was a very hard conversation. We did have some people that basically had an outburst in our talk back and left. You know, we've been questioned about why we, you know, do a production where, you know, we use a prop gun, and being literally told, you know, you shouldn't even be doing plays with violence, period. You know, things like that. Or, you know, just having a conversation about like in a film class regarding the first like film on sound, which was, you know, the Jazz Singer. And then you start really unraveling that and what the implications are in terms of race. And then looking at the next side of that, which was Birth of a Nation. And my colleague was the one that had a student that really had issues, not with the race aspect, but really focusing more of the white supremacist aspect, and really wanted to focus that in a favorable way, you know? And so we were like, whoa. Or even then, like in terms of having that conversation regarding race, and then having to like be challenged about our perspective of race, and what it means to in terms of racism and anti-racism, and being challenged where they don't see that, and then having those conversations. You know, I do have a colleague that, in terms of the work that they do in their work, a lot of it is utilizing like Angela Davis or Bell Hooks. And so you know, in terms of their work and their curricula, that is what they do. And that's even for their dual credit classes, you know? And so really doing that type of deconstruction and having those conversations. And, you know, yeah. And so you know, some things do come into question, and parents have questioned those things, and at the same time, we've been backed up about academic freedom, and like, yes, this is good. It's not just pushing an agenda, but you're actually having a dialogue, and allowing them to formulate those things. But yeah, we have that protection. But then when you look at school districts, it becomes a different story. And, sometimes you're being voluntold like what you're going to do or how things are going to be, and that's where it gets it becomes scary. I don't know if anybody has anything else to share. One of the things that I know that we want to continue on was in terms of next steps, was really talking about advocacy, and what that means for what we can do in our own communities, and then what we can do in support of our colleagues, especially those that are in the public schools right now. And so that will be the next step. So in terms of like what you may want to see happen the next time, if you were to come back in these conversations, what is it that you would want to, what would you want to see or discuss at that time? Because I want to get a sense of that, because we really do want to cater this to this issue and to this focal point, because again, it's something that's gaining momentum. It is something that is like popping up from state to state to state.
I would say one thing that would be really interesting for us to try and do is actually have some sort of session that clearly goes, this is what critical race theory is. That's so many people, the term is tossed around, and yet people know opinions, but they don't actually know what it is. I think that's something that if we can hit those kind of things where it's like, okay, this is clearly what this is, and then these are what laws are saying about, whether it be about critical race theory or whether it be about this horrific thing that's happening and shutting down so many things regarding LGBTQ people. But really having like, these are the actual statements, so that we're aware with the correct terminology and understanding, instead of, like at this point, I know I hear a lot, but, and even when I'm trying to filter information, it's like, okay, where are my real sources, kind of thing.
I think that's on point.
And maybe I would add, looking at the progressive states, what strategies are people using in those states? I didn't finish my, when I mentioned that station I listened to, and it comes, I think, out of Florida or Mississippi. So that's how I find out what's going on in, quote unquote, the rest of the country. Because here, like I said, it's, we're looking for Texas as a goal. And you've already said, no, Texas shouldn't be a goal. But yeah, what strategies are people in progressive states doing to kind of combat or to counter what's going on? I think that would be something maybe that we could discuss, because whatever strategies they are doing, maybe we could adapt or look into further.
Perfect.
I think there's also, do the best I can with the wording. I think it's so, critical race theory gets thrown out and becomes this awful thing, but no one really defines what it is. Or we can give okay, it's a legal, it's a law school theory from many years ago, but now it's really accepted as this, in the same way that Black Lives Matter started as one thing and has been, you know, just the permutations of it and what it means. You know, I wonder if there's something there to like, what is it that we really want to see, as opposed to getting caught in the naming of things. I guess, I mean, that's something that I struggle with, or we get some pushback in one of these progressive states of that too, where we get, you know, like, oh, we have to define all of these terms, but, you know, the actual definition, the accepted definition, and the weaponized definition
Mhm.
are all very, very different. And I think it's finding a way to discuss those all together that can maybe move people forward.
I agree. Um, because again, it's true that as long as we know what the terminology is, how it's being used, how it's wrongly being used, that really does help us out when we're like in those moments, or when we're having to either defend ourselves or to really be there and advocate for somebody else. And it's so important to have that. I keep going back to like this I believe it was last week when we were when they were doing the Supreme Court, you know, um, hearings, the candidate with the committee and all of that stuff, and just seeing that occurring, and how they were focusing on particular things, and again going back to like that, how that was being used in a weaponized way, you know, which is troubling, and that really bothered me. That really pissed me off actually. But and again, Texas. So yeah. Anything else comes to mind? Alexis, I'm really curious. What are some of your thoughts as RED?
It's a great question. It's interesting being in this position, as it's not directly affecting me, as far as I'm not in a classroom and having to fight these fights. But it's interesting. I live in Washington, D.C. And so therefore, a lot of what you mentioned about legislation, of course, hits very close to home, but in particular, Virginia is right across the bridge. And so we get to hear all about the debates about critical race theory and about banning of things. And to think that this is maybe 20 to 30 minutes from where I actually live. And DC has a very different interpretation of what people right across the bridge believe. So it's been interesting hearing this, of course, super frightening. The one thing that really kind of interests me, and I'm kind of talking to playwrights and stuff about now, it's like, how is this affecting playwrights going forward as far as book banning? What is happening in the kind of the play world? And there was one playwright in particular who had a play who was based on a book that is banned, but her play itself is not banned because she's like, nobody knows about it yet. But when they do, there might be that concern. It's just stressing, bottom line, but it's an interesting conversation for sure.
Is this something organizationally as AAT, because we are a wide sort of group, is this something you're hoping to make a conversation amongst the entire membership? Or what's the sort of the hope next steps?
That's the plan, is to have this conversation as a larger conversation. And then even then, possibly even reaching out to other orgs and colleagues like ADTA and to have a broader conversation about that. Because again, it's impacting a lot of people in a lot of ways. And, again, it focuses like it targets core in such a way, but we know how the trickle down happens when it finally does impact, when it comes down to the arts, when it comes down to other aspects. And then, because again, it becomes far reaching. And then when you're talking about curriculum, and if it ends up being to the point that everybody's having to submit curriculum a year ahead, that affects everybody, and people will find something somewhere. And it is a larger conversation, and it's something that we will intend to do. So, and it's something again that when we look at like who we are and the path that as an organization that we have chosen in terms of anti-racism, anti-oppression, justice, and equity, this falls in line with that. Because again, everything that what is being proposed in these like states and in the legislation is completely opposite of that, and we know where that is, and we can name it. We know what that is. It's it's racist, it is oppressive, it is all these things that, again, like when a bill is being nicknamed "Don't Say Gay," it's obvious who the targets are and how and what they're trying to do. And it's, again, I my heart goes out to the students that are in these schools that are already having that impact. And at the same time, my heart leaps to see, like, for instance, like all the student actions that are occurring in Florida, for example, to fight against this and to say, no, this is not going to happen. No, we're against this, and so you're seeing that level of activism happening, which gives me hope as to what we can see, in terms of our future, in terms of our future leaders. But I also know that we need to be able to create that safe space, that creative space, that learning space that these students deserve and rightfully deserve. And so, again, like to find those, and again, when we know how theater becomes that space for so many people for so many reasons. And even in college, it's the same thing. They have that space to just let everything out the door. They enter that space and they're able to just be, and to be able to like just either forget about what they're dealing with or find a way to really connect and make those connections so they can process what they're dealing with. And also, like, maybe just to be able to discover something new about themselves. And we know that happens all the time. And just to know that students are now having to deal with this type of thing when they come into the school is just insane to me. It's insane, But we only have about 7 minutes. So I wanted to say thank you for coming today. And I've also wanted, like, if anything else y'all want to share, let's share now. But I look forward to seeing y'all at the next TIOS that I will be hosting, which will be at the end of the month of April. And please, like, I can't wait to see y'all there. Is there anything else you want to share, Alexis?
Well, of course, I would love to share that we have an upcoming conference, in addition, where some of these conversations will definitely be occurring, and it will be in person in Providence, Rhode Island.
Yay.
And I'm going to share some information here for people who haven't heard my pitch before. So absolutely, please check it out. There's scholarship opportunities as well as a tiered pricing scheme in order to make accessibility financially a little easier. So check it out. And as Jason said, we'll see you hopefully at the end of April. Yeah, and then we'll have another one follow up in the end of May. So keep your eyes out for that on our TIOS page.
Y'all, this conference is means so much to me in a lot of ways, but this is actually being hosted in Providence, Rhode Island, where it was actually my first official full-time job. I used to work at Brown University at the Center for Public Service. And so for me to come, that was back in 94. So coming back after almost gosh, I was only there for till 96, but to come back and to go back to Providence is so exciting. It's such a wonderful space. And it's just a beautiful place that has really supported the arts for the longest time. So I'm so excited to be there. I hope y'all can go so we can enjoy it together. The food is insane. So I'm so excited. I got to lose a lot of weight so I can enjoy it. I'm already wanting to go to Little Italy to have some tiramisu because it's so good. And to drink coffee milk. If you have never had coffee milk, that is an experience. You've got to try it. It is not what you think, but it's a deal. Little kids go for it. They love their coffee milk. And it's I don't know how to explain it, but coffee milk, it's a thing. And Dell's lemonade.
Hope everyone took notes, and now I'm hungry. Thanks so much for joining us this evening, everyone. This conversation was a wonderful way to kick off this 3-part series, and I hope you all have a great evening, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for coming. Be well. Enjoy your evening.
Love to you